Before we get into the trends, I want to clarify one thing about terminology. In this video, I'm going to use the word Chinese to mean what most learners call Mandarin, the modern standard spoken language of China. The reason is that Mandarin is actually a bit of a misnomer. The English word comes from European usage based on the Portuguese Mandarin, referring to imperial officials, administrators of the late imperial state, especially during the Ming and Qing dynasties. In other words, Mandarin originally meant the language of officials, not a clearly defined spoken language in the modern sense. In China today, the standard language is called 普通话 in mainland China, meaning common speech, and 国语 in Taiwan, meaning country language. So when I say Chinese in this video, I mean modern standard Chinese, not the many regional Chinese languages, and many of them I would call languages and not dialects, and not the old bureaucratic idea behind the word Mandarin. For years, Chinese was presented as the language of the future. Learn Chinese because China is rising. And that's true. The recent speed of development is incredible, especially in infrastructure. So learning Chinese because business will require it was what most people would say. Learn Chinese because it's inevitable. But when you look at the actual learning trends over the last decade, something unexpected appears. Chinese has not continued to grow the way many people confidently predicted 10 to 20 years ago. In some regions, especially in the West, enrollments have plateaued or even declined. So what happened? Was the prediction wrong? Or did people just misunderstand what drives language learning in the real world? As with every video in this recent series I've been making about the top languages studied around the world, we need one important reality check. There is no single global authority that ranks languages by how many people study them. No UN list, no UNESCO master ranking. What we have instead are patterns drawn from school and university enrollments, national education systems, learning platforms, and independent adult learners. And across those sources, the story about Chinese is more complicated than the old hype suggested. So where does that plateau show up, that lack of continued growth? In Western education systems, in particular, Chinese enrollments peaked earlier than expected. In universities in the United States, enrollments in Chinese language programs dropped significantly after the early 2010s for the last 15 years or so. Similar patterns appeared in parts of Europe, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, the English-speaking world. That doesn't mean no one studies Chinese. It means the explosive growth people predicted never fully materialized, and in some cases reversed. In other words, declined. So why did people get this wrong? There were several assumptions behind the everyone will learn Chinese narrative. First, people assumed that economic power automatically translates into language learning. But history shows that's not how language learning works. English spread not just because of power, but because people could use it easily across borders. Chinese, by contrast, had a high initial barrier, tones, a non-alphabetical writing system, and slow early payoff for many learners. In other words, the chance to use the language. Second, many learners never reached the point where Chinese became immediately useful in daily life. Without immersion or regular interaction, motivation drops fast. Then we have the geopolitical and psychological factor. There's also a factor people often avoid talking about. Language learning is emotional. People are drawn to languages that feel open, welcoming, and personally meaningful. In some regions, political tensions and shifting perceptions made Chinese feel more distant, but not less important, but less personally inviting. That matters more than analysts like to admit. But Chinese, of course, it still matters. None of what I'm saying means that Chinese is unimportant. It's still spoken by more people as a first language than any other language on earth. It remains essential in China, Taiwan, Singapore, and large diaspora communities worldwide, particularly in Southeast Asia and the United States. For people who live, work, or deeply engage with those communities, Chinese is absolutely worth learning. But the key change is this. Chinese is no longer an automatic recommendation. It is a deliberate choice. The real lesson isn't that Chinese failed. The real lesson is language learning doesn't follow macroeconomic predictions. People learn languages when they can imagine themselves using them, when they feel rewarded early on by progress or by using media, and they see themselves having this language fit into their real life by the choices they make. Chinese hasn't disappeared. It's just no longer the default answer to the question, what language should I learn next? And that is why I've been concentrating on this series. And that tells us far more about how language learning works than any headline ever did, any sensational hype. As for me, Chinese has been a huge part of my life. It all started when I studied Chinese literature in graduate school at Kyushu University here in Japan. I took countless trips to China, starting in the early 80s. Interesting enough, that meant flying from Fukuoka, where I live, to Hong Kong and going to Chungking Mansion in Kowloon, where there were travel agents who helped you get a visa. You more or less bought a tourist visa. It was impossible to get one in your home country. So I would go to Hong Kong, get my visa, buy some books for my study in Chinese literature, and then take trips into China slowly, usually up the Pearl River by boat, and then a bus to Yangshuo, and to Guilin, to Kunming, up to Chengdu, and I even went to Tibet 2 times. So I've made numerous trips, starting with those in the early 1980s. Also, for 4 weekends a year, over a period of 3 years, I taught an EMBA class. That means it's an MBA class for people who are working during the week and study during the weekends. So I taught this EMBA class in international negotiation for Tulane University in both Shanghai and Taipei. In Shanghai, it was with Jiaotong Dashui, and in Taipei, it was Tulane and Taiwan University, Taida. At the same time, as a professor here in Japan of international management, I had many students from China in my classes and particularly in my seminars, as they preferred somebody who could speak Chinese. Also, most of my graduate students were from China, so often I did the classes in Chinese instead of Japanese.
大家好，我現在那說到我嚟到講說話啦。我現在嚟今日是2016年6月7禮拜二。我現在嚟當了副国俄罗斯精英。大家好，能猜到我现在正使用什么语言在说话吗？今天是2016年6月7号，星期二。我现在住在福冈，正在学习现代经济。আপনারা কি কেউ বলতে পারবেন আমি কোন ভাষায় কথা বলছি? আজ 2016 সালের 7ই জুন মঙ্গলবার। আমি এখন জাপানের ফুকুওকাতে বাস করছি এবং ম্যানেজমেন্ট সাবজেক্টে রিসার্চার হিসেবে পড়াশোনা করছি।
今日は2016年の6月の火曜日です。私は福岡に住んでいて、経済の勉強をしています。
今天是2016年6月7号，星期二。我现在住在福冈，然后现在学习经营管理的课程。
ค่ะตอนนี้นะคะวันนี้เป็นวันอังคารนะคะที่7มิถุนายนพศ2559ค่ะตอนนี้เขาก็อยู่ที่ฟุกุโอกะนะคะแล้วก็กำลังเรียนปริญญาโทปี1นะคะอยู่ที่ม.นี้ค่ะบ๊ายบาย
大家好，可以采用啊，现在我台湾是跟大家来签32年6月7星期二现在老的是班老的到了的经营管理。
Chào, mọi người thử đoán xem mình đang nói ngôn ngữ nào. Hôm nay là thứ ba ngày mùng 7 tháng 6 năm 2006. Hiện giờ mình đang sống ở tại thành phố Fukuoka của Nhật Bản và mình đang học khóa học của kinh doanh tại đây.
大家能猜到我现在说的是什么话吗？今天是2016年6月7日星期二。我住在福冈，我现在学现代经营管理。
你猜出我讲的是哪国语言了吗？今天是2016年6月。
Last year, I traveled around China 2 times, 1 month each time, in April and October. I will be going again in February and March this year, 2026. I have been very impressed by the Chinese rapid development of infrastructure, making travel comfortable and inexpensive. I mean, the trains are amazing. They're like the fast trains we have here in Japan, Shinkansen. But in the last 7 years, they have increased the distances covered by tenfold. So making many places to visit that used to take a long time to get to, very accessible, comfortable, and inexpensive travel. And the accommodation and food is much, much cheaper than North America or Europe. I would say 20%, 30% of the cost and sometimes, especially in the case of accommodation. So if you haven't been to China, you might want to check it out now. For holders of Japanese passports like myself, we automatically just get a stamp and we can stay for 30 days and leave and come back and get another stamp for 30 days. I believe that a number of European countries have been granted the same privilege for a certain amount of time. I'm not sure when it ends. I believe it's a little bit more complicated for U.S. passport holders, but don't let that discourage you if you're from the U.S. You can still get a visa to visit China. Also, if you're just want to stop over, I think they have a 10 or 15 day stopover visa where if you have a international flight going from the same airport, let's say you fly into Beijing, you can go around for 10 or 15 days. I'm not sure the particulars, but you can find it on the internet. Anyhow, yes, Chinese is a great language to learn if you have the personal reasons to learn it, but it hasn't become that must-learn language many people predicted 10 years ago. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video.